Does your work energize you? Does it make your impact on the world? Welcome to Start Anew, the show that looks beyond success into freedom, fulfillment, and your passion-driven career. Join your host, Symbol Sang, for inspiring stories and bite-sized training to help you start anew with clarity. And now, here is Symbol.
Hey there, starters. Welcome to Motivation Monday on the Start Anew Show. Today, I interview inspiring individuals who have started anew in life with a new dream, a new vision, doing what they love and sharing their gifts with the world. I sincerely hope that their incredible stories inspire you to start anew with clarity and confidence. In a moment, you and I will be joined by my guest, Angus Nelson. Let me read to you an extract from Angus's website, which beautifully sums up this man's mission. Through my podcasting, speaking, writing, and coaching, I'm creating resources to change lives and building a community of leaders more self-aware, confident, and impactful in our society. And speaking of self-awareness, if you're starting anew in life, you have got to begin with self-awareness. Download your free self-awareness toolkit from any page on the website at letsstartanew.com. Now back to Angus. He's a fellow podcaster, author, speaker who has spoken at corporate headquarters for international giants like Coke and BMW. He's been featured on AOL.com and Huffington Post. He's an expert on relationships and leadership, and he's the author of the book, Love's Compass, How Do You Recover After a Lost Relationship? He's got a little gift for you, a free ebook on networking with effectiveness and credibility, which he'll talk about a little later in the show, and we'll share a link for you to get a free copy of that as well. Today, in part one of our interview, we get to know Angus and unfold the series of events in his life that led to his most significant transformation and made him the man that he is today. In part two of our interview, which goes on air on Wednesday, Angus puts his coaching hat on and coaches you on how to beat fear of success, fear of failure, fear of being judged, and how to start anew fearlessly and confidently. Now, without any further ado, let's get Angus on board. Angus, hello and welcome to the Start Anew Show.
Well, hello, Symbol. It is a pleasure to be here.
So excited to get to know you a bit more today and share your story with our listeners. So, Angus, you have a beautiful family and a fulfilling life, creating value for others through the work that you do. But was there a time when life was very unfulfilling and unforgiving? Really take us to that moment and give us a glimpse of your life at that time.
You're talking about a time that would have been about 20 years ago. So in late 90s, my brother and I started a nonprofit organization, and it was a company that served young population, teens and 20s, and it was based around an arts-driven youth center. And so we worked really hard to do great things. In the process, we ourselves made some mistakes. Things didn't go quite as planned. And in addition, anyone that knows anything about nonprofit knows it's a really competitive space. And in and amongst that, we also had 9/11 hit. So we were struggling on finances. We were struggling on just getting the engine revved up. Now, on the outside, it looked really successful. We had over 15,000 kids come through our doors in little central Wisconsin. That was pretty awesome. But behind the scenes, the finances were making a toll. And I felt in some realm, now looking back at it, that I allowed that organization to become part of my identity. And in my mind, I stated that if it failed, I failed. And if I fail, then it makes me a failure. So what I did is I worked harder, because that's what we do, right? Whenever things get difficult, we just continue to work harder. We put our head down even further and we just strive. And in so doing, I was trying to cope with the pain of working 60, 70, 80-hour work weeks. And I turned to pornography. And then I turned to alcohol. And then between the two, I turned to promiscuity. And I was married at the time. So now I've jeopardized not only my character and my values, I've also jeopardized my marriage. And eventually we had a note slid under our door where the city stated that they were tearing down that entire block to build a new parking ramp. They offered us $35,000 to rebuild, which was not nearly enough of what we needed. And I was exhausted and I crumbled. And in the midst of it coming out to light that I had addiction issues, I went through a divorce, I lost the organization, and I lost my self-worth. And of course, I lost my vision as well. It took me about 3 years of intense search for personal development. I did counseling, I did spiritual work, I did everything I could to get my heart right. And to see the world through a different lens, because as far as I was concerned, I was done. And then I discovered this thing called grace, that I could love myself and that it wasn't about perfection and performance. And I learned to stop performing for other people, stop trying to please other people, and stop trying to place my value on what I do, and instead find the beauty in my brokenness to embrace who I already am.
That is so beautiful and so powerful, Angus. So many of our listeners can relate to this feeling of attachment to the achievements and accomplishments in life. And if something that they do failed, they think that they failed and their self-worth hits rock bottom. So how do you pick yourself up from a point like that in your life?
I wish I could tell you it was just really simple. Just do these 3 things and you'll be fine.
Yeah, 3 steps too.
And, and that's funny because, as tragic as the story was, when I wrote my book about all of that season in Love's Compass, I didn't want to write it like 7 steps this, 5 ways that, da, 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 da. Even though those things sell, people buy that stuff, it's an absolute lie. And we know it. But we still think if there's a formula that I can follow, then I can achieve the same results. And it's simply not true, because it's so unique to each and every one of us. And so the reality is, how do I get to a place where I can connect with transparency and vulnerability in a place that's safe? Because when you finally can come clean and you can share the stuff that's going on in your head and in your heart, well, that's like bringing a fungus out from the darkness into the light. It can't grow anymore. You've robbed it of its power. And so the first thing to me that was empowering was confession, when I was able to just talk about it. And for me, that started with a counselor. And I thought anybody who goes to see a counselor symbol is just crazy. Like only, nuts people go talk to a counselor, right? And what I realized is that all of us are a little bit nuts, because we have this chaos we've built in our own heads and called that normal. We've taken the experiences and the environments we've been raised in and called that as a standard that everyone else is measured by, and yet it has nothing to do with everyone else. It's just what I know, and what I know to be true is all that I know. I don't know what I don't know. And in my own narcissism and my own ego, I embrace my chaos and call that my norm, but also in addition, I also know what to expect. Even if it's, full of addiction, even if it's full of, craziness, like at least I know what to expect because I live there. But if you cause me or challenge me to change, I don't know what's there. And that's one of the reasons why many people will self-sabotage themselves from growth or maturity or from personal development, is because those things to them become something to fear and something to shun. But to stay in my chaos, it's great, it's fine, it's dandy, but I don't care that my life isn't going forward, again, because then I'm not cause to go to a new place.
I like how you say that, this is a journey of healing and recovery that would be unique to every individual. But from your experience, would you say that counseling or therapy is something you would recommend to anyone who is sort of hit rock bottom in their life?
For sure. Absolutely. I'm just a wholehearted believer in that. And beyond that, I said something earlier before that I think is a critical component, and that is the feeling of safety. It's feeling safe. And another component of this is surrounding yourself with people who are safe. We all have family and we have friends, but they aren't necessarily safe. They're people that maybe are sarcastic or cynical, or they judge you according to your past or raise you to some standard that you could never achieve. Family sometimes can be a little twisted. Families aren't perfect.
Most of the time, they are a bit twisted.
Right? Yeah, right? And so sometimes they're not always the safest. In addition, our friends sometimes are only our friends because of our own position or our own, place in the world, but not necessarily someone that's safe. And so I challenge people to Jim, I believe it was Jim Rohn that said, you are the sum total of the 5 closest people to you. So to find people who are at a higher echelon, a higher level of, fill in the blank, success or personal growth or maturity, to surround yourself with those kind of people, first of all, it will cause you to want to be what they already are. 2, they will have some sensibility about them that they're not going to judge you because of where you are. They're going to encourage, they're going to cheerlead, and they're going to challenge. The other component of that is when you're around people in that, environment, you give them permission to ask the tough questions. And that's really the only way that you can get through your stuff, again, because once you bring things out into the open, once you get it into the light, the power is lost. Furthermore, what we don't realize is that with all of the things that we experience, we think we are the only ones. We isolate ourselves from the world because we think nobody knows what I'm going through. Nobody knows this pain. Nobody knows this circumstance. And you have to know, out of 7 billion people walking the face of the earth and all of the billions that have come before you, I guarantee you, other people have gone before you and experiencing exactly what you're experiencing. The nuances may be, a little bit skewed this way or that way, but every one of us have gone through a gamut of emotions in our lives. And I love to tell people that no matter where you're at and what you're going through, you are not alone. But you'll never know that until you come out from your chaos.
Really powerful stuff there, Angus. So anyone who find themselves in a downward spiral, you got to find a safe place, a community where you won't be judged, where you can speak openly about what's bothering you. Angus, but let's take a step back from, the lessons learned, and let's go back in time to your story. So you're at this place where you've hit rock bottom, but you started counseling, and that starts to transform you. Tell us what else happens around that time that really helps you get back on track.
I think the first thing that I would recommend to people is to understand that this is not an overnight, situation. You have to learn how to give yourself a lot of permission to make mistakes. My first go at it was, a lot of self-hate and a lot of self-abuse. So I, was kind of schizophrenic in some ways. On one hand, I started counseling. I was reading books, personal development as well as spiritual books that were talking about seeing myself in a new light. At the same token, I'm still singing karaoke at the pubs and, still, meeting young ladies, and I'm pursuing a lifestyle that's contradictory to the one I'm pursuing. All at the same time, because I'm hurting. I'm in pain and I'm coping with the best that I knew how. Now, obviously, I didn't know that it was, contradictory to where I was at. It's just where the place I was in. And as I started to grow, I started to kind of let those things kind of fall off. This is not as important to me anymore. This is not healthy to me anymore. This is not helpful to me anymore. And as I kind of was rising up, almost like, when we see like a movie or science thing, as the mountains are coming up out of the water is still a part of the mountain as it's coming up, but it eventually is running off. And those are kind of the things that entangle us, the old habits, addictions, the old mindsets. And here's the thing, as I was saying before, we hang on to these pieces of chaos. It's almost like we clench our fists around these things that we know. And all of those mindsets, those preconceived ideas, at some point in time, if you have the humility and the vulnerability to simply open up one of your hands to let go of what you know, your hand will be available to grasp new ideas, new concepts, and new understandings that you don't know. And from that place, as I started to take on new filters for how I saw the world and how I saw myself, it was in that I began to grow. Relationships were a key component. Counseling was a key component. But in addition, I had tenacity and perseverance because I didn't want to stay in that place. And it's one thing to go through the actions. It's one thing to go through the activities. It's another thing to buckle down and actually implement and execute transformation. That's intentional. And so I would filter myself when words would come out of my mouth and I'd be speaking words that were condemning. Oh man, I'm so stupid. I'm such an idiot. I stopped those from my vocabulary. And I went to a place where I instead started writing on my bathroom mirror with a dry erase marker, affirmations, scripture, any quotes that I would see. And many times I would take them, I'd put them in first person active tense, and I'd put my name in the midst of it so that I knew that I was those things. Because here's the problem. We spend most of our lives trying to become something or someone. And we strive. And just like I said, and when it gets difficult, we strive even more. For me, I became a workaholic. Like I kept working harder and harder, exhausting my resources, exhausting these finite things that I actually needed to put into a different direction. And that direction being now implementing this mindset. So as I'm writing these affirmations on the wall, as I'm writing these things on my heart and in my head, what I found is that I started to change the perspective of what I was trying to pursue. I could either live in the past, where now I'm a victim of those experiences and that failure and those mistakes that I made, or I could live in the positive and think of something that was really great. And I could say, oh man, Symbol, do you remember the good old days? Man, if we could just get back to that again, then I could be happy. Or people sometimes live in the future and they say, when I get this, then I'll be happy. But when you get to this, you're going to have to find that. And then from that to this, because it's never ending, because you're never going to achieve the thing that makes you happy. And at the same time, you're looking to the left and to the right and seeing other people on their journey, and you're going to judge yourself according to their story. And instead, I learned to live in the present, because in the present, I have the only tangibility and control over the things around me. And I found myself growing in gratitude because the elements of my story were creating me. And I wasn't always happy with what was currently going on, but I was always happy in the fact that I was moving forward. And from that gratitude came generosity, and I started to love people again. I started to love myself again. And from that generosity came this element of satisfaction, fulfillment, and happiness. And here's something really crazy. Every one of us love to be with happy people. So as a result, opportunities started to present themselves to me different relationships, and that's how I met my wife. That's how I made new friends. That's how I had new job opportunities. And I just kept the pedal to the metal to say, man, this is a way of life. And from being in that place of generosity and gratitude in the present, I found momentum that kept moving me forward, that drove me to work harder, not from the striving for validation, not from the striving of being accepted, not for the strive of being approved, but simply because I was having fun. And I was loving what I was doing and loving what I was living. And some way, somehow, I went from a background of destruction and nonprofit and empty pursuits to getting an opportunity to work in corporate, in Fortune 1000 companies, working with some of the top people and top producers in the world. How in the world did that happen, Symbol? I have no idea. But I'm loving the ride. I'm loving the opportunity because I'm staying present and loving people and loving myself. And that is invaluable, and you cannot put a price tag on that.
Absolutely. Now, I'd like to touch a little bit upon this thing that you've talked about a couple of times, is being present. Now, being us women, we have a particularly harder time doing that because there's always a gazillion thoughts in our head about things in the past and things in the future. Do you have any tip from your personal experience or from your coaching experience and how we can really live in the present?
First thing is, you have to retrain your brain. It's like a computer, right? Whatever you put in, that data is filled into the hard drive. And then when you access the data, whatever's in there is going to come out. And so what I like to say is that what you hear about, you think about, you talk about, what you talk about, you ultimately bring about. So one of the things I say is, if you want to know what you believe, listen to your words. You want to see what other people believe, listen to their words, watch their actions. In the midst of that, living in the present is understanding that the story you're telling yourself about you is a product of the information that you're qualifying or filtering. And so if you want to truly live in the present, you have to start filtering even the things you're putting in your mind. So reading books that talk about who you are, whether through personal development or spiritual growth or personal growth, like that's a primary element of that filter. The second thing is understanding that your story is ever evolving. And so whatever you've experienced does not define you. Your tomorrow is not dictated by your yesterday. Today is the only day you have anything that you can connect with. And there's an acronym to today. It's the only day actually yours.
I haven't heard of that before.
Right? And in this day, I can move forward by the richness and fullness of how I embrace the people around me, how I see myself interacting and interplay with the world. Because when I come from a place of generosity, I'm not a victim and I'm not living by default, but I'm actively leaning forward into fulfilling whatever it is that's right before me. And now when I talk to somebody, I'm not looking over their shoulder to see who else I can talk to. Mm-hmm. I can just focus on the person before me. Out of generosity, I offer value to other people because I'm living out of the abundance of this joy, happiness, fulfillment, and satisfaction. So you have to really retrain your brain to be here and not somewhere else.
So, Angus, what is it that other people who are suffering from bad relationships, what is it that they can learn from your book, Love's Compass? Give us a couple of your favorite golden nuggets from the book.
Sure. But before I do, I just want to tag on one thing of what I was just saying about, living in the present. Turn off the TV and stop reading that crap magazines you're reading. Stop taking a look at what the world's trying to feed you as perfection and rightness. because that is part of the quotient that you are comparing yourself against. Those things are all photoshopped. They've all been touched up. And they set a tone that says that you're only valuable if you achieve these certain ranks. That stuff is BS. It's absolute crap. All right, moving on to the book. So a lot of what I just shared with you is inside the book. That we don't recognize that tools are so necessary for life. And one of the tools that my wife and I still actively pursue, we just celebrated our 9th wedding anniversary last week.
Congratulations.
Thank you. We were up in Chicago. I was speaking at an event, and as part of the celebration of our marriage, I kind of snuck out from the event activities, and my wife and I went out for dinner, and then we ended up on the top of the Hancock building on the 96th floor and enjoyed some cocktails overseeing a lit up nighttime Chicago. It was gorgeous. An activity we went through just last week is something we've done throughout our marriage, and I talk about it in the book, and that is 5 loved, 5 unloved. And the two of us talk about what makes us, individually feel loved and what's unloved. And when we first started, we each had 5. This is years ago. There are elements that both of us came through from our previous marriages and pain and things we had gone through. And there were counseling that we pursued as a couple before we actually got married. I mean, we were doing marriage counseling before we were even married.
You start your relationship with some counseling to start on the right foot.
Absolutely. So we worked through some of our fears. We worked through what are some of the challenges that we had coming out of our past relationships. What are some of the elements of the influence that those created? And furthermore, we actually had really hardcore conversations about what our expectations were. So simple, there's 3 things that really hurt relationships. That's judgment, offense, and expectation. The judgments are the things we place on people because we think they do things for the same reasons we do things. And so, somebody might be having fun and now they're going to be sarcastic. But for me, when I'm sarcastic, it's because I'm annoyed. Oh man, they're being sarcastic with me. They must really be annoyed with me. Oh, what'd I do? And then we go down this rabbit hole thinking like we've done something to hurt them. But God forbid we should actually ask a question and say, hey, you were just really super sarcastic. Did I do something wrong? We're not going to ask that question because we're full of pride and we're full of, ego or offense. We have these things in our minds because people do things. Now, I've offended you. I think I've offended you. So now I'm offended because I shouldn't have offended you. And now I'm going to hold a grudge or I'm going to keep score of all the times you've let me down. And the moment we have... You know what I mean? Or the moment they do something wrong, you say, well, not only did you do this, but you also did that, this, that, and the other. Those kill relationships. And then the third piece is, these expectations. We just think that, the way that a relationship's supposed to work is supposed to be like X, Y, and Z because of that's the way my grandparents always were. That's the way my parents were, or that's the way I see it on TV. Like we have these things and nobody ever talks. Nobody ever sits down and has these conversations. So my wife and I went to counseling to actually start talking about these things immediately in our relationship. And so we already knew like we wanted to have kids. We already knew that homeschooling might be an option we'd explore. We already knew that if we had kids, that one of us would stay home with them. We wanted to have an intimate bond with our children. Like we talked about how we were going to manage money. We talked about a number of things so that we were really clear when we came into the relationship, like what those expectations were, what were some of the past offenses we were, and how to get past the things that, would cause us to be judgy. Like it started our marriage so intentional and so healthy. And so on our wedding day, and I talk about, this in the book, prior to that, we sat down and had a talk about what are the 5 things that make us feel loved and 5 things that make us feel unloved. And like I said, back then we had 5 of each and, 10 in total, and we were able to communicate, hey, when you when we're driving and you put your hand on my back and you tickle the back of my neck, that makes me feel loved. It makes me feel like we're together. My wife would tell you, when you're sarcastic, that makes me feel unloved. Right? And we would go through little things like that. And as we grew, every year we'd try and do 5 loved, 5 unloved during our anniversary. And now here we are, after we're at our 9-year anniversary. I really only had one thing that made me feel unloved. And then I had one thing that kind of makes me feel unloved still, but not really. It's kind of, because of circumstances. And then the things that make me feel loved, some of those I was able to share as well. But it's not as many because through the years, we've become so intentional to just meet those needs that they're no longer something on the forefront of our mind anymore. They just are. And here's the beauty. So many people think, why should I change just to make you happy? To which I say, you're an arrogant, selfish son of a bitch. Because the opportunity of a relationship is for you to experience transformation, to be a more beautiful human being. And it is my opportunity to serve my wife in that capacity, to make her feel safe, to cause her to feel that she can be transparent and vulnerable. And I'll tell you what, 6 years into this, I've watched the last 3 years of my wife blossom. She's become more confident, more radiant. Her relationships are deeper. She gets ladies together and they have Wine and Five, where they drink wine and talk about the 5 things that are challenging them in life. And these women are just ultra vulnerable and ultra awesome. And my wife has been able to embrace that because of the environment I had opportunity to cultivate. And then she had the courage to dive in. That's the beauty of relationship. And we are so fixated on what makes me happy and why I should have the beautiful person that's going to make all the money and have all the power, and then I'm going to be happy. What a bunch of hoo-ha. That is the emptiest, most shallow quest of relationship on the face of the planet. And the sad thing is, most westernized culture is stuck in that cycle.
So like you said, that a large part of the Western world might be quite focused on, being unique. This is who I am. I don't want to change for anyone. Love me just the way I am. And then there are parts of the world in Asia and Africa where it's the exact opposite, where you kind of just, especially women, are just groomed to just please someone, adapt and compromise until they lose their own identity. They lose a sense of who they are and what they want in life. What is your view on that?
So everything needs to be an equal component, right? So if you have one part of the relationship that's just giving, but you have the other part of the equation taking, well, that right there is enablement and dysfunction. That is completely contrary to what I'm saying. Because, I think you're absolutely right. We give ourselves from a different component or motivation because we think if we give, then you'll love me. So there's a switch there on the motivation because now I'm doing something to get something. I'm trying to get an extraction of an equation. That's unhealthy. The second component is, especially when it's cultural, is now I lose myself because this is what I'm supposed to do. This is my obligation. This is my performance. That becomes unhealthy because now I'm doing it again for all the wrong motivations. All of this comes down to being so fulfilled and strong and stable in yourself that you have a ridiculous self-worth intact. And now you're offering out of the abundance, not because it's an obligation or performance or thing you have to do, it's just who you are. And when you get 2 characters in a room that have that kind of fantastic, empowered reality, amazing things, beautiful things can happen from a couple that has that kind of resilience and persistence, perseverance, generosity, trust, love, joy. It just goes on. there are very few couples that actually attain that kind of reality. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. It's easier said than done, though. I can imagine it takes a lot of work and the right intention every day of your life.
Oh, no, piece of cake. Just flip a coin. It's awesome. Yeah, no problem. And, that's really, I love that because, man, my wife and I, we've had to gut this out. We've had conversations that went into wee hours in the evening because we refused to go to bed being upset. Like, we call it static. Like, in the room, when things just aren't right, and you can just feel the static in the room. We can't stand that. Like, we are really intentional to say, all right, something's not right. What's going on? When I can feel my wife shrinking back, all right, what's going on? And this is something we learned from Brene Brown. She said in one of her books, she said that she challenged her husband challenged her and said, what's the story you're telling yourself? Those are the fabrications of those judgment, offense, and expectation that we have in our own mind that create these stories. And so many times these stories are just not true. But that's what we tell ourselves, and that's what we embrace, and that's what we define the rest of the world around us by. So in those moments when my wife might be feeling weak or vulnerable or whatever, and she doesn't want to share what's going on, I have the opportunity to come in and kind of press a little bit harder and say, hey, baby, what's the story you're telling yourself right now? And then she has the opportunity to open up and say, I don't feel good right now. I don't feel stable. Like, for instance, and I'll just be a little transparent. I spoke at a conference last year, and I was the MC, and I came down off the stage, and everybody was congratulating me, and there were hugs, and there were pictures, and there was a picture of me with a girl that was hugging me, and my wife wasn't present. She didn't have context. She wasn't there in the room. But from the outside, this person tagged me. They posted this photo on Facebook. It looked kind of like this girl and I were an item. And my wife was hurt by that. And so when I came home, hey, how was the trip? Da, da, da. And I could just tell something was off. And we finally got to a place where she told me. I'm like, oh, I am so sorry. Like, I tried to say what actually happened, but how is that perceived is now I'm just defending myself. And instead, what we did is we turned it into a learning opportunity. I said, you know what? We're going to create some new boundaries. From now on, I'm not going to be in that position again. And I'm not going to, take pictures with people where I have my hand on the young lady's lower back. If it's in a position where we're together, the hands will be on the shoulders. And, we clarified some stuff that would help us feel comfortable. And again, these are conversations that between the two of us make a lot of sense, but maybe to other people don't make a lot of sense. But it's the efforts that we have gone to make one another feel safe.
Angus, you're also coming from a place of high emotional intelligence, which is rare to find in men particularly.
Right, right. Yeah,
so what is your advice to those women in relationships with those men, who are not so emotionally intelligent?
So just because they're not emotionally intelligent doesn't mean they aren't actually intelligent. Define those two, very, very differently, obviously. But one of the things that I love to do, it's the same way I treat sex. I never ask for sex, beg for sex, or plead for sex. I inspire it. Right? It's kind of the same thing with emotional intelligence. Women oftentimes don't realize how manipulative they are.
No, we do realize. We do realize. We just don't like admitting it to other men.
Right? Right? So what we'll do is we'll, quietly suggest, oh, you should read this book. Oh, it's so good. Sally's wife, her husband read it. You should read it too. And so we try and change our spouse. Trying to change someone is nothing more than manipulation. And so the best way for you to to get someone to quest after emotional intelligence is for you to set the tone and model it. When you see something in your husband, you speak to it. Women also have the capacity to build men up to conquer the world. There is nothing more fragile than the male ego, and as a man, I can say that. And the same capacity that a woman has to move a man through manipulation, she also has the capacity to build a powerhouse. She has the ability to inspire a man to conquer the globe. Because the words out of her mouth speak to his innermost question, which is, do I have what it takes? Every man wrestles with this question. And we are so busy self-doubting ourselves and then trying to compensate through our ego, through our strength, through our charisma, that we are too afraid to let anyone in to know that right now in that moment we are deathly afraid. And we are full of imposter syndrome because we fear the day that someone might look behind the veil and see us for who we really are. And instead, if a woman can speak to that and say, I believe in you, you got this, I'm with you, those words are like fuel and gasoline to a man's heart and engine. That can change a man. And the more that you become sensitive to his needs and watching his rhythms and then being able to feed those things, eventually they'll say, you're kind of amazing. How are you doing that? And when a man can get to a place where they can see like the value of the mechanics in, say, a Myers-Briggs, disc profile, Colby A index, strengths finder, those are things that are becoming more commonplace where people are starting to learn from a business context about themselves and their teams. That starts the ball rolling for them now to understand other people as well. And that's when emotional intelligence really starts to grow.
I know you've been coaching us along the way, but I'd like to bring the focus a little bit more on the journey of starting over in life, journey of starting anew to find more fulfillment in life. So I've done maybe a couple dozen of such interviews with people who have had a significant transformation in their lives. And a common theme is that when this realization strikes that, they've got to change something or they've got to start over, many of them are crippled with fear. My question to you is, why are we so afraid? And what is it that we can do to become more courageous?
There's something really disturbing about the human condition is that we very quickly gravitate to the worst. It is why media and news, 80 some odd % of it is always just the worst things that have happened. For whatever reason, that animal side of us loves that condition. Like, we just keep watching all of the chaos and the drama. The flip part of that quotient is we also go there in our own lives, in our minds and in our hearts. We immediately think of the worst case scenario, and it becomes debilitating because in that moment it is as if you have horse blinders that come on and it closes out every possibility or opportunity, and instead locks you into some expected outcome of something tragic. And to combat that, you have to identify it for what it is. I'm scared spitless right now. And number 2 is, can you surround yourself with people that are going to tell you otherwise? Again, having the 5 people around you that believe in you, can ask the hard questions. In that moment, they're there to support you and cheerlead you. And then hopefully you have a spouse, a partner that is there with you too in the midst of that can speak the good things. And the third component is to understand this. If you lost everything, how really bad would that be? We think out of our pride and our ego and our narcissism, that some way, somehow that would define us and that people would look at us less. But the reality is things, stuff is just that. Things and stuff. Relationships are all that really matters. Mm. Inner joy and value for yourself, that's what matters. I've traveled the globe. I've been in Haiti and Venezuela and Thailand. I've been into the backwoods of all of these countries of the Soviet Union. And I've seen people who had very, very little and still maintain incredible joy. We've got our priorities completely screwed up. And now we think because we're in this moment that this is the defining of my failures, my weakness, and my inadequacies. And in that moment, I say, never in your life do you have more primary, awesome opportunities to reinvent yourself. And to sink into that moment, to lean into that moment and say, here we go. Where are we going to do? What are the things I've always wanted? And instead of seeing this as something that's bad, seeing it as something incredible and life-giving and powerful, that now I finally have permission to do whatever it is I want to do.
Perspective.
Like that perspective changes everything. And it's a mind hack. And does it happen and then all of a sudden, boom, the switch turns? No, again, Sembul, go get those dry erase markers and put them on the mirror. Write it on I write things on the back of my thumb where it's not going to rub off because I'm grabbing stuff. I'll put a little nugget there and just something occurs. Like, you have to trick your brain, because your brain is not, it's not a friend sometimes. I have a friend of mine that has this quote on the back of his business card that says, your inner critic is an asshole. Because he's cruel and he's mean to me. So I don't want to listen to my inner critic. And you shouldn't too.
Speaking of our inner critic and judging ourselves, one of the fears that a lot of people have, and certainly more so women than men I've read, is this fear of being judged, fear of what other people are going to say, which holds them back from trying new things. What is your view on that? What do you think a person can do to stop caring so much about what others say?
So there's two trains of thought. You can strive to do things to get away from what you don't want, or you can embrace opportunities to move towards what you do want. Two very different motivations. If you are so fixated on what other people are thinking, then your motivation becomes trying to do things that won't cause them to judge you. The problem with that is they're judging you anyway. Success or failure, they're judging you. That's just what they do. And it's nothing personal. It's their own ridiculous chaos.
Yeah.
However, the opportunity for you to embrace what it is that you do want is getting to that place that you are so fulfilled and so consistent in your self-love and who you are, you don't care. Yes, I would love for people to think I'm brilliant and beautiful. I would love for them to think that I've got the best ideas. But it's just not life. It's not reality. But here's the essence here is the quality and caliber of my fulfillment and satisfaction today, and the caliber and echelon of people I surround myself. That's all I need.
Angus, thank you for joining us, inspiring us, and coaching us today. Before we wrap up, tell us what is the best way to connect with you online. Share with us the free gift that you've put together for the listeners of the Start Anew Show, and then we'll say goodbye.
Absolutely. So you can find me at Angus Nelson on just about anything. Come find me on Twitter at Angus Nelson, Facebook, the like. It's all Angus Nelson. And my website, angusnelson.com. And there you'll find links to my podcast as well, which is called Up in Your Business, Building You to Do Business Better, and a number of my videos and things that I've been building out to help you be your most successful and most fulfilling self. The ebook that I created for you is a product of me learning two things and all the influencers and the executives I work with. When I'm coaching people, I find myself discovering two components that have been successful in people's lives. One is they've maintained being a self-learner. They've continually iterated their lives and their careers because they keep learning. Never in history have you had the power of learning in your pocket, just from a smartphone. You can access information from anywhere. That's a critical component. The second one is the value of great relationships. If we have not echoed that enough on this show, relationships are amazing. And whenever people think about the term networking, they see it as something slimy and gross and schmoozy. And I got to tell you, it doesn't have to be that way. Especially if you're someone who says, well, I'm just an introvert. I can't be around people. I would push back and say, because you're an introvert, you are even more skilled to develop awesome, powerful relationships. It's not about knowing 1,000 people skin deep. It's about knowing a handful of people very well and offering value and serving that person. Not about getting and taking. That's how networking is all jacked up. So I built an ebook to help give you techniques on how to create value to those relationships. And it's called Networking with Effectiveness and Credibility. It's about 8 pages long, and it's super practical and gives you step-by-step instruction on how to attend an event well. And I make that available to you for free. You can go to angusnelson.com/start anew.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Start Anew Show. We invite you to be more than a passive listener. Be a starter. Join our community and snag exclusive freebies from Symbol and her guests at letstartanew.com. Create your vision of freedom and fulfillment right here on the Start Anew Show.